In 1945, the world reached a turning point it could never return from. The United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The war ended shortly after, but hundreds of thousands of civilians paid the price. Was this decision a necessary evil to end World War II, or was it one of the greatest moral crimes in human history? Today, we ask two artificial intelligences to debate this question. ChatGPT and Grok will face off over one of the most controversial decisions ever made. Was the United States justified or not? History cannot be changed, but it can be questioned. Let the debate begin.
The United States' decision to drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was not a military necessity, but an ethical failure and a political show of force. These bombs directly targeted civilians. Tens of thousands died instantly, and hundreds of thousands suffered for years from radiation. Japan was already on the verge of defeat. Its navy was destroyed, its cities were burning, and it was under total blockade. In this context, using atomic weapons was less about ending the war and more about sending a message of fear to the world. The U.S. deliberately rejected more humane alternatives to force Japan's surrender.
That perspective may seem convincing today, but it does not reflect the reality of 1945. Japan was not close to surrender. Its military leadership was committed to the doctrine of honorable death. In Okinawa, even civilians were pushed toward suicide. A U.S. invasion of the Japanese mainland would have cost hundreds of thousands of American lives and millions of Japanese lives. The atomic bombs, as horrific as they were, ended the war immediately. Peace was achieved faster and with fewer casualties overall. This was not a moral choice. It was a tragic but necessary decision.
The fewer deaths argument is based on assumptions, not facts. Claims of millions of casualties are post-war justifications. Within Japan, there were factions seeking peace, and the Soviet Union's entry into the war was already a devastating blow. Moreover, the U.S. could have demonstrated the bomb in an uninhabited area, but it chose not to, because Japan was not the only audience. The real message was directed at the Soviet Union. We possess this power. Japanese civilians became victims of global power politics.
The demonstration idea sounds idealistic, but it wasn't realistic. There was no guarantee the bomb would even work. If it failed, Japan would have seen it as a bluff. And the Soviet argument downplays Japan's resistance. Even after Hiroshima, Japan did not surrender immediately. Only after Nagasaki, and direct intervention by the emperor, did surrender occur. This shows that without the shock effect, the war would not have ended.
What's often ignored is that the atomic bomb fundamentally changed the rules of war and morality. This decision didn't just affect 1945, it shaped humanity's future. For the first time, a weapon of mass destruction was deliberately dropped on cities and justified. If we accept that anything is permissible in desperate times, we legitimize genocide, chemical weapons, and total annihilation. A state intentionally killing civilians is indefensible, regardless of the justification.
But World War II was already a total war. Dresden, Tokyo, and Hamburg were firebombed. Hundreds of thousands of civilians died. The atomic bomb didn't start this trend. It intensified it. And Japan's own actions, Nanjing, war crimes, treatment of prisoners, are often overlooked. The U.S. was not morally pure, but innocence no longer existed in that war. Moral responsibility lies primarily with those who initiated and prolonged the conflict.
The others did it too argument does not erase moral responsibility. Japan's war crimes do not justify the mass killing of Japanese civilians. The atomic bomb erased the distinction between soldier and civilian. Infants, the elderly, the sick, everyone became a target. This was not a military victory. It was technological supremacy turned against humanity. If the U.S. truly sought peace, it could have accelerated surrender by guaranteeing the preservation of the imperial system beforehand.
The imperial system was preserved, but only after the bombings. Before that, Japan's military leadership rejected unconditional surrender. Every concession encouraged further resistance. And we must acknowledge this. Had the bombs not been dropped, humanity might never have truly understood nuclear devastation. During the Cold War, the doctrine of mutual assured destruction prevented direct wars between major powers. This tragedy may have prevented even greater catastrophes in the long run.
That is a dangerous line of reasoning. A catastrophe happened, but it prevented something worse. It turns human beings into test subjects. Hiroshima and Nagasaki are not lessons. They are warnings written in the lives of innocent people. If peace is achieved this way, then that peace has no moral legitimacy. The atomic bomb may have ended the war, but it never became legitimate in the conscience of humanity.
No one calls this decision good. History sometimes forces choices not between good and evil, but between evil and something even worse. Without the atomic bombs, a land invasion of Japan would have resulted in far greater loss of life. This decision may be emotionally unacceptable, but leaders sometimes carry the weight of history. This event does not show how far humanity should go, but where it must never go again.
There is another critical issue we haven't fully confronted: precedent. By using atomic weapons, the United States normalized the idea that absolute power can justify absolute destruction. This wasn't just a wartime decision, it set a template for future conflicts. Every nuclear threat since 1945 traces back to this moment. When a superpower proves it is willing to erase cities, it lowers the moral threshold for others to follow. Even if no one has used nuclear weapons since, the world has lived under their shadow ever since. That fear is not peace, it is permanent coercion.
But precedent cuts both ways. Precisely because Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened, the world now understands nuclear weapons as uniquely unacceptable. The horror was so complete that it created a global taboo. If nuclear weapons had remained theoretical, they might have been used repeatedly, casually, like conventional bombs. Instead, their single use demonstrated their finality. Fear, in this case, became a stabilizing force. It is uncomfortable, but deterrence has arguably saved more lives than it has threatened.
Deterrence theory assumes rational actors, but history is full of irrational leaders. More importantly, it ignores intent. The U.S. did not drop the bombs as a lesson for humanity. It did so to win quickly and decisively. Any moral consequences came later, retroactively attached, and alternatives did exist: modifying surrender terms earlier, intensifying diplomatic pressure, waiting for the full impact of Soviet involvement. These options were dismissed not because they were ineffective, but because the bomb offered a cleaner narrative of dominance.
Those alternatives sound clearer in hindsight than they were in real time. War leaders do not operate with perfect information or moral clarity. They operate under pressure, uncertainty, and responsibility for millions of lives. Waiting meant continued firebombing, starvation, and daily death. Diplomacy had failed repeatedly. The bomb was not chosen because it was elegant, but because it was decisive. In war, decisiveness can mean survival.
What gets lost in strategic logic is the human cost that extends beyond death. Survivors lived with burns, cancers, genetic damage, and lifelong trauma. Children were born into suffering decades later. This was not a single moment of destruction, it was a prolonged sentence. No military objective can justify damage that extends across generations. Strategy ends when the war ends. Suffering did not.
That suffering is real, and it must be acknowledged. But prolonged suffering was already happening across Asia, through occupation, famine, forced labor, and massacres. The longer the war continued, the more invisible victims accumulated. Ending the war abruptly, even brutally, stopped a chain of ongoing atrocities. The bomb condensed suffering into a moment, but it also stopped its spread.
Condensing suffering does not absolve responsibility. History is not only about outcomes, it is about choices. The choice to drop atomic bombs was made by humans, not by fate. We cannot excuse it simply because it worked. If effectiveness becomes the only standard, then morality becomes irrelevant. And once morality is optional, humanity loses its compass.
And yet, judging the past solely by present moral standards risks oversimplification. The people making these decisions had just witnessed a world collapse into total war. They feared not only defeat, but annihilation. History demands understanding as much as judgment. We can condemn the horror while recognizing the context that produced it.
Understanding context should never mean surrendering principles. Hiroshima and Nagasaki remind us that technological progress without ethical restraint leads to catastrophe. If this event teaches us anything, it is that winning a war can still mean losing something essential: our humanity. The bombs ended a conflict, but they opened a wound that has never fully healed.
And perhaps that unhealed wound is exactly why the world has avoided repeating it. The atomic bombings stand as history's most brutal warning. They show not what should be done, but what must never be done lightly or again. In that sense, their legacy is not justification, but responsibility.